Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. That was probably the scariest Reform Party press conference that I've seen yet, because they were saying, screw the law, screw democracy, screw human rights, we're doing fascism, with their whole chest.
That Reform will be the toughest party on law and order and on crime that this country has ever seen.
For example, this is how Reform MP Sarah Pochin responded to the recent terrorism that's been taking place in Ballymena, Northern Ireland, and in Epping, England.
Recent unrest in Northern Ireland and Epping should serve as a stark warning to this government that the British people will not put up with this betrayal for the next 4 years.
Listen to the words she just said. That was not a condemnation, that was a justification, saying that those people who were firebombing the homes of minorities are speaking for the British people. That what they're doing is a warning towards the government, a warning that she supports. Firebombing the homes of minorities for political reasons is objectively terrorism, and she is supporting it. So when I call the Reform Party a terrorist organisation, I goddamn mean it. And Nigel Farage didn't go quite so far, but he still backed up the same point.
14-year-old girl is sexually assaulted by an Eritrean who'd arrived by boat 8 days before. So the answer is yes, I do understand the genuine upset and anger. And I'll bet you that most of the people outside that hotel in Epping weren't far right or far left or anything like that. They were just genuinely concerned families.
Now here's the thing, do the people in Epping have a right to be angry? Absolutely. But why weren't they rioting and attacking police cars over this guy who raped a teenage girl in 2017? Why didn't they attack the neighbourhood of this guy who raped a woman last year? Why weren't there mobs roaming the street looking for the man who assaulted 2 teenage girls in the park, again in the same area? Like, I don't remember people from that side of politics getting particularly violent in response to the 2 police officers who were found to have unlawfully strip-searched a black teenage girl. They only seem to get violent when the attacker isn't white, which tells you this has never been about the safety of women and girls. And so all you've got left is the leadership of the Reform Party supporting people who are committing acts of terrorism against minority groups. And that's not even the only time the Reform Party supported terrorism in this press conference.
I have 2 Lucy Connellys in my constituency of Runcorn and Helsby, one of whom I visited recently in HMP Kirkham.
Sorry, Lucy Connelly called for refugees to be burned alive. The guy that Reform MP Sarah Pochin just admitted to visiting in prison, saw the attacks that were happening against minorities, and called for more of it, trying to organise a rally with torches and pitchforks. These are the people who instigated what is probably the most widespread crisis of terrorism our country has seen in decades. And the Reform Party is making sure they don't get lonely in prison. Farage also complains that the general public is losing respect for the police, and he blames that on this
concept that we're living in a system of 2-tier policing and 2-tier justice under 2-tier care has really taken hold. You only have to look at the reluctance to prosecute those violent thugs in Manchester Airport who beat up those police officers. It took months and months and months for any prosecution to be brought, and yet Lucy Connelly, her case was dealt with in days.
Yeah, in Manchester, the police officer stamped on the suspect's head, whereas Lucy Connelly called for refugees to be burned alive and pled guilty. So one of those cases was a bit more open and shut. So if you say that it's the narrative that means that our justice system is unfair towards white people, who's been pushing that narrative? Farage will always create problems and claim to be the solution. But that's because Farage is playing from Trump's handbook, just like with this.
They won't all be MPs or prospective MPs. I'm a great believer that we can bring people in to senior ministerial roles from outside of politics, especially from outside of career politics.
The man who sold us Brexit on the basis of we need to get rid of all the unelected bureaucrats is now saying that if he gets into government, his government ministers will not be elected politicians. And bear in mind, the Reform Party is only polling at about 30% of the vote, but under this voting system, that's all they need to take full control of the government. So on less than a third of the vote, Nigel Farage is telling us that a Reform government will be just full of his unelected mates. Because screw democracy.
I resigned as a magistrate to fight the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, and for the reason I did, that being, I believe you can never mix the judicial system with politics.
She was literally given an official reprimand for conduct unbecoming of a magistrate for trying to use her position as a magistrate for influence in a political context. So what she just said is proven bullshit.
And yes, we do think dynamic prison places overseas work, so we can send some of our worst violent criminals overseas to serve their terms, then yes. And if that means that Ian Huntley goes to El Salvador, well, our attitude is so be it.
Again, just copying Trump by planning to lock up people from his own country and send them to foreign prisons with fewer human rights, which even a journalist from The Telegraph pointed out.
You just said you will not be taking human rights away from British prisoners, right? But you've mentioned El Salvador. El Salvador, as I'm sure you know, is in a 3-year-long state of emergency, where it detains people without trial, including around 3,500 children. It is notorious for overcrowding, a country in which there are just 70,000 prison spaces with 109,000 people in them, and where torture is reported and over 350 people are suspected to have died. Are you comfortable with sending British people to prisons with those kind of conditions?
Okay, we are not going to send people for trial in El Salvador.
Okay, but that still means you could send Brits to El Salvador after they've been convicted. Sarah Pochin?
Our prisons are too soft. If they lose some human rights about family visiting or whatever else it might be, or Sky TV in their cells, well, it's a good thing, because it's about time we got tougher with these people.
So you're saying it's a good thing to take away human rights from British citizens. And bear in mind, you've already said that you don't want actual terrorists like Lucy Connelly to be in prison. So I can't help but wonder if your idea of who deserves to go to jail is a bit biased. In fact, you just confirmed that it is.
Enough of police sympathising with protest groups that simply do not reflect the views of the majority of the British people.
Now, for starters, she's talking about the people that are protesting to ban the sale of weapons to Israel, and most Brits support banning the sale of weapons to Israel, so she's objectively wrong there. And even if she wasn't, she's implying that the police shouldn't tolerate certain protesters if the aims of those protesters don't align with what she believes to be the will of the people. Again, the Reform Party is saying screw democracy. And here's one that's particularly concerning to women.
And we will aim for a higher and physically tougher standard of police officer on our streets. I think that if criminals slightly fear the police, that is a desirable place for us to be as a society.
Now, he goes on to say that diversity, equity and inclusion policies have prevented the police from having the kind of tough officers that he's looking for. It is very much coded to, I want a police force filled with men. And I want you to keep that in mind when he responds to the challenge about how he supported James McMurdoch despite him being convicted of beating his girlfriend.
And the reason that I did defend him then, as strongly as I did, I thought here was a very good case of somebody who had rehabilitated, who had gone on to live a constructive life.
So this is a man who is saying he wants the police force to be filled with tough men, but he's also okay with women beating men being in positions of power. And given the many cases like Sarah Everard, given that the Metropolitan Police has been found to be institutionally misogynistic, it is becoming increasingly laughable that this man claims to care about the safety of women. And finally, this is how Nigel Farage justifies all of this.
You can see that actually there are some significant rises in crimes. Quite extraordinary that in London alone, shoplifting should be up by 150% since 2021. Nothing short of societal collapse.
2021 was the year that the UK left the EU single market, and the UK's Food and Drink Association says that's one of the reasons that UK food prices are so high. The Bank of England also says it's taken £1,000 a year off the average household, and the government's Office of Budget Responsibility said the UK experienced the sharpest fall in living standards ever recorded. And it is widely understood that the UK's cost of living crisis has played a major role in the sharp rise in shoplifting. So Nigel Farage pushed millions of people deeper into poverty with Brexit. That poverty then pushed people towards crime, and Nigel Farage is then using that crime as a pretext to build an authoritarian regime. And again, he's only able to do this because the UK is not a democracy, because he's going to get 30% of the vote, but he's going to have absolute power in Parliament. So if you are not focused on getting the UK a new voting system, then you are helping the UK crumble into fascism. I am Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.